this? Is it about greater subsidies for farmers? What do you think central government can do to help farmers out?
Well, as Ali mentioned, there's opportunities for farmers to join the Sustainable Farming Incentive, where they can take different management options rather than growing crops on their land, which then reduces their vulnerability. But many farmers feel heavily drawn to producing food, and we need to work to change systems. Many farmers are adopting what they call regenerative farming techniques to try and improve levels of carbon within their soils, which makes soils slightly more resilient to these extremes of weather.
What's the one thing that you'd like to hear Steve Reed say today at these various conferences to try and address these issues?
Well, the new 24 release of the Sustainable Farming Incentives were greatly welcomed, and that they now cover organic farming in more detail as well. So to offer stability and security that these schemes will continue. It's been quite a maze for farmers to work out what is available to them, and these schemes have been changing rapidly over the last 18 months with new options released. These options are welcomed, but it's just made it quite a struggle to know what is the best management decision for your farm to create a financially stable future for the business.
Okay, Professor Nicola Cannon, Professor of Agriculture at the Royal Agricultural University. Thank you very much indeed for your time. It's 7 minutes 9. Just to tell you before Emma takes us to the close that we've got a new edition of the Today podcast just released this morning. Nick and I discuss the whole battle between free speech and content moderation and the truth in the era of Elon Musk. Big changes announced this week by Mark Zuckerberg about how Meta, parent company to Facebook, is going to approach the whole idea of truth in the digital age. And Nick and I spoke to Vivian Schiller, who's a former head of news at Twitter, who had some pretty strong opinions on Elon Musk and plenty else. Just search for the Today podcast on BBC Sounds.
It's 6 minutes to 9, but in a programme where we have been covering the very cold weather, also farming, we thought we'd bring the programme to a close with some hope for the gardeners out there, with the warmth of Monty Don, who happens to have a new TV series out called Monty Don's British Gardens. Might not be the weather everybody's feeling like getting out there, Monty.
No, it's a good. On the other hand, if you can sit indoors and see sun and a certain amount of colour, although I have to say the filming which took place this summer and the previous summer, we had a lot of wet, we had a lot of rain. It was quite tricky. You know, it's our summer weather. We were flooding now, but the summer weather is also changing.
Let's come to the flooding in the moment, because I know you've got personal experience to reflect on perhaps, but 60 gardens visited from northern Scotland to the southern tip of Cornwall. Is there a British garden?
Well, it's the question I asked all along, because I travelled a great deal. I've seen gardens all over the world, always asking, what is this telling us? What's this telling about the place and the people and the culture? But to my knowledge, no one's ever done that with Britain's garden. So I had a look. I think there is a British garden. I think it stems from two things. One, ironically, given what we're talking about, the climate. We do have a fabulous climate. I know we have all this, we're obsessed with weather, but actually for growing things, compared to the rest of the world, it's really good. So that, we have the wind in our sails as far as that goes. The other thing is that we were heavily industrialised early. So for most people, their only access to Arcadia, to this idea of the countryside and a piece of land, was their garden. And that developed. And I think British gardens are incredible leveler. It cuts through class and colour and race and creed and all those things in a way that, say, sport does. It's similar. And also, it allows you to be yourself. You can be eccentric. I mean, one of the wonderful things about British gardens is they're quirky, they're odd, they're weird. You have aristocrats. We have one aristocrat I went to Lamport Hall where aristocrat developed most of his life developing a rockery filled with gnomes that he believed were alive. And this was.
I didn't know what you were going to say.
Yeah, and that was absolutely normal. Someone else marvellous garden in Kent, where they got married, and all she wanted for her wedding presents were yew seedlings, so she could grow them on. And now, 30 years later, they're the most fantastic topiary, and that's very British. And I think the other thing is that we have this real deep connection with growing things. Rather than just looking at a garden, we want to do it. So if someone says, I've got a garden, you don't think who did it for you. You say, what do you got? What do you do? How do you deal with floods? How are you dealing with climate change? And whether it's a Duke or a dustman or radio TV presenter, you expect them to be able to engage with you. That's very unusual.
It's in my future gardening. I can feel it, but we haven't met yet. I just appreciate others' work on this front. Just because you've brought it up, Monty Don, what is your position on gnomes and talking to them?
Well, I think if you have a gnome, it's rude not to talk to them. Talk to gnomes.
I was so hoping you say that. You've got some issues with flooding yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talk to someone from Herefordshire. We live on a floodplain, so flooding has always been part of life, wherever. But it's definitely got worse. It's definitely got more frequent. And I mean, I've lived where we have for 34 years, and I've just observed that. And I think gardeners everywhere are having to deal with this. I mean, one of the things of filming from the north of Scotland right through Britain is you'll see wherever we went, people were having to deal with changes. It's adapting. And floods are proving to be a much bigger problem than drought, actually. 20 years ago, if you'd asked me about climate change, I would have said that we're going to be a Mediterranean climate and we need to adapt to that. I think what's shaping up is we have these big events and we need, our gardens are very wet and very dry and very cold, and that's tricky.
Yeah, because you say about, with your situation of recent times, first it was the first time in 34 years you simultaneously had flooding and lying snow.
Yeah, I've never seen that before in the garden. And I mean, it's these big dumps of rain that come down. What's so odd, it's not like we've had weeks and weeks and weeks of rain. It can be almost overnight, and the water's come up. I mean, on Monday, for example, my wife and I couldn't get out of the house or garden when we flooded in. No one could come in, no one could go out. Now, that's fine. I have a 97-year-old neighbour. If anything had happened to him, it would be in helicopter time, I guess.
Which ties in a little bit to what we've also been talking about. But you have done this look across our country. It's wonderful to have a bit of a flavour of what's to come with that. If you want to see Monty Don's British Gardens, it starts tomorrow at 8 o'clock on BBC Two and iPlayer. And do you like talking about the weather, just out of interest?
Yeah, I'm obsessed by the weather. All gardeners are obsessed by the weather.
It's just when you like talking about it, not. Well, now we know your view on gnomes and that we're safe. Monty Don, absolutely lovely to have you on the programme.
Thank you.
Monty Don is English. He loves nothing more than talking about the weather.
I don't. I'm just going to say that.
You're curious.
I'll learn.
That's all from us. Our editors were Dan McAdam and Tom Fielder. The studio director was Sharmini Ashton Griffiths. Have a wonderful, slightly cold day.
BBC News at 9 o'clock. Firefighters say they won't be able to extinguish deadly wildfires in Los Angeles for many days yet. 5 people are known to have died in the blazes so far. Flames are continuing to lay waste to acres of scrubland, suburbs and multi-million-pound homes. Plans for new sanctions to target the finances of people smuggling gangs are being set up by the government. Ministers want to freeze the assets and bank accounts of firms involved. The Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, told Today he would bear down the full arsenal of his department on the criminal networks.
When we look at the manufacture, the storage, the transportation of many of those boats that are getting people, flimsy boats by the way, with very poor engines that are getting people across the channel, there are companies that sit behind that, often in other nations. We know who those companies are. We can go after those value chains and those supply chains.
The US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is hosting President Zelensky and representatives from dozens of Ukraine's allies at an American airbase in Germany this morning to discuss further military aid. Mr. Austin said Washington must continue its support, but the president-elect Donald Trump is reluctant to do so. Police investigating a fatal shooting outside a church in northwest London last month have arrested an 18-year-old man on suspicion of murder. Michelle Sadio, who was 44, shot dead as she stood with mourners after a wake in Brent. Two of the UK's biggest retailers, Tesco and Marks & Spencer, have reported strong results for the Christmas trading period. Tesco said its UK sales were up by 4.1% over the key 6-week festive period compared with the previous year. Marks & Spencer said its overall sales were up 5.6% for the quarter. More than 100 schools have closed across the north of Scotland, which is facing extreme cold and snow and ice. Highland Council said 100 schools and 50 nurseries were shut, while more than 20 schools in Aberdeenshire were also affected. BBC News.
In Woman's Hour this morning, the issues raised in a new TV drama about two couples who discovered their toddlers were accidentally swapped at birth, and two women who developed a firm friendship through a shared experience of a rare form of cancer. Those stories at 10. But now on Radio 4, Matthew Syed is looking back. As 2025 gets underway, he's examining the last 25 years. What were the really significant events, and how could they shape what's to come? Welcome to the fourth episode of my new series, 25 Years of the 21st Century. When I was in my late 30s and still single, and my parents were despairing of having grandchildren, I got a call from my sister, and she said, "I have put you on a website called mysinglefriend.com. It was a bit of a shock. Obviously, she was feeling that I was taking too long to get hitched, but it did reflect a fundamental shift in how we connect with people and the texture of our relationships. So in this episode, as we swipe to find love and consult chatbot therapists, we're going to think about how technology has altered the way we approach dating, friendship and community, rewriting the way that we make sense of and experience our lives. It's not all about technology though. There have been huge changes in social trends, the makeup of our family networks, demography and economics. So how have the concepts of intimacy and belonging changed in the past 25 years? And what does that mean for the rest of the century?
America is tonight reeling from a devastating series of terrorist attacks.
Almost from the moment that Twitter was hatched, it became this thing that started to change the world.
Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
The Chancellor has said, don't panic.
So did the captain of the Titanic. That went down.
This is the worst public health crisis for a generation.
I'm joined throughout the series by Margaret Macmillan, Emeritus Professor of International History at the University of Oxford and author of several acclaimed books. Sarah Harper is Claw Professor of Gerontology at the University of Oxford and a Fellow at University College. Megan Nolan is an Irish novelist and journalist based in New York. So how has the way we do relationships changed from your point of view in the first 25 years of this 21st century? Megan.
So I think there's two main things for me. The first is that using dating apps or services, online services, became not so esoteric and scary. So when I was still living in Ireland, I moved away from Ireland when I was 23, 24, and up until that point, they existed, but in my head they were sort of either for people who couldn't meet people in a usual way, for not very flattering reasons, or they were just a bit too dangerous to use. And so it was only sort of as I got into my mid-20s that I thought, okay, maybe I can try to use those. Nobody will murder me, and it doesn't mean I'm a failure. Yeah.
Now they've been integrated into the lives of millions of people.
Yes. And so I think that's the main difference, is that then became how I primarily met people that I've dated in the last 10, 15 years.
Margaret, put us in a historical perspective here. How do you think the texture of our relationships have changed during this first quarter century?
They have and they haven't, I think. We like to think change is absolute and takes place and that everyone's different. But people still have their all sorts of relationships. Family relationships are still very important. The relationships with the people you went to school with are still very important. And I think face-to-face relationships are important. I mean, I think that became very clear during COVID. We may have different ways of getting in touch, but I still think that the meaning of a true community is when you get together with people.
So?
I think the really big change is between generations. So the way that we relate to our parents and parents relate to children, I think has just been transformed in the last 25 years. And there are probably two main drivers for that. One is, of course, divorce. Divorce became common from the 1970s onwards, and that was accompanied with other social trends, which meant that the idea that you grew up in a nuclear family where you had two parents and ideas about how you behaved came from your parents has just been completely transformed. So young children now, many of them are growing up in reconstituted families or step families or alternative families, and then of course technology has come in, and so it isn't just teachers or your parents. You can get your information from a very young age from different types of social media, being on the internet. And the other really big change, of course, is increases in life expectancy. Now half the population of the UK will live till 82. And that means that most older midlife people, say in their 50s and 60s, are very likely to have dependent older parents. And so, in fact, we now live in a relationship where we have dependent parents longer than we are dependent children. And I think that has real implications. All exactly the same idea that we used to have this obligation almost to get married and to have children. And that has just gone with this current generation. They're seeing life completely differently. So across all high income. But I think it is exactly to this that Margaret's been talking about.
Just on that demo.